This is my DEC Tower of Power, and it's so tall and powerful that I had to put the camera quite far away and put the 24mm lens on it in order to be able to fit it all in the frame. But the goal with this is to have a DEC Rainbow on top with the VR241 color monitor and the hard drive option installed in it. And then the PDP-1144 will have the commercial instruction set, the floating point option, 4 megabytes of memory, and an Emulex SC12 SMD controller card that'll be hooked up to a Fujitsu 2312 80 megabyte SMD 8-inch hard drive with a TU58 tape drive. And all of that will be supplemented by an FPS 100 arithmetic processor that will supply 8 megaflops of single instruction, multiple data, vector processing performance, but that will then work as the control processor for the FPS 3000, which will add 18 megaflops of multiple instruction, multiple data, vector processing performance, making this a supercomputer from the 1980s and one of the densest, most powerful things in this room. But the key word there is goal. We are very far away from achieving that right now. The FPS 3000 is complete, but in a completely unknown state. The FPS 100 is incomplete. I have the front panel, a full board set for it, but nothing else. The PDP-1144 seems pretty healthy though. It's actually coming up nicely. The CPU, the floating point option, and the commercial instruction set all pass all of their tests in XXDP, which is excellent news. I do only have 1 megabyte of memory in it currently, but I have the remaining 3 megabytes in cards ready to be installed whenever we get around to that point. The Emulex SC12 seems to be doing the right things, but the hard drive that it's hooked up to, the Fujitsu 2312, is, I think it came out of a VAX, so it's completely formatted for the wrong system. So what we need to do today is try to get RSX11M onto that Fujitsu 2312, because RSX11M is the operating system that all of the software for the FPS systems was written in. And thankfully, my buddy Mark is on speed dial, who knows more about RSX11 than anybody I've ever met. And so we have a bit of a game plan, but first things first, we got to figure out how to format that drive into a PDP-11 format, which I think we can do with the Emulex card itself. The Emulex SC12 here can connect to 1 or 2 SMD drives, but it's going to present those SMD drives to the PDP-11 as multiple RK06 or RK07 drives. The reason it has to do this is because, for example, we're connecting up to a Fujitsu 2312, which is like 80 megabytes, but the RK07 is only 28 megabytes and the RK06 is only 14 megabytes. So our Fujitsu 2312 is going to appear as multiple drives to the PDP-11 and RSX11 operating system. So if we look at the manual here, let's make sure that everything's set up correctly. We've got a Fujitsu 2312, and if we come all the way over to the right here, we can see that we have multiple different configuration options: 11, 11A, 32, 32A, 53, and 53B. I think we're just gonna go with the first option here, which is 11. And we can see that drive unit 0 is going to be presented to the system as 2 RK07s for disk 0 and 1, and 1 RK06 for disk 2. So let's make sure that the switch is set correctly. Key 1 on the switch is going to be closed, and it is. Key 2 is open, key 3 is open, and key 4 is closed, and then the rest are open. I think I may have set this in a previous episode and just forgotten about it. I'll go ahead and slot the SC12 back in, and then I'll connect up the A and B cables. But before we turn on any power, let's make sure that the Fujitsu 2312 here is set up correctly. And the first thing that we got to check is that termination is going on, because SMD drives require termination. Double checking in the manual, it seems that all of the termination resistors should be right in front of this fat cable here, and it definitely looks like all of those are in place. That's a good start. So let's next make sure that the dip switches are set correctly. It looks like key 1, 2, and 3 should be off for disk address of 0. And if we look at the switch, every single key is off here, so 1, 2, and 3 are going to be off. If we look at key 4, this is going to set the device type to 2311 or 2312, and 2311 is off, 2312 is on. That's definitely off there, and we definitely want that on. Okay, key 5 is, provides optional tag 4 and tag 5 functions. I don't know what that means, but it's currently disabled, so I guess we'll just leave it disabled. Key 6 is the sector mode. If it's off, it's going to be hard sector, and if it's on, it's going to be variable soft sector. It's currently off, so it's definitely set to hard sector, but I think that for the SC12, we want this set to variable soft sector. And when it formats the drive, it'll put down new sectors. Key 7 here says, when the customer desires to inhibit the write operation, you have a file protect key. We definitely want that off so that we can enable writing, so that we can properly format and write stuff to the things. Okay, I've got the hard drive spun up. I've got the PDP-1144 up. You can see that we're sitting here at ODT, ready to start punching in values. So we're gonna start with a deposit of 1. That's interesting. There we go. I don't know why. I don't know why I did that. We're gonna do a deposit of 1777745 and the value we want to deposit into this is a 40. This is doing a subsystem reset on the Emulex SC12. So next we're going to do a deposit of 1777745 and we're going to deposit a 0 into this. And so that's going to be the drive that we're working on, which is going to be disk 0. Then we want to do a deposit of 1777744 and we want to put the value of 2003 into that. And this is a pack acknowledge command, whatever that means. So next we're gonna do a deposit in 1777746 and the value is going to be a 1 and then 5 zeros. This is to set the pack ID. Bit 15 must be 1, bit 14 must be 0, and then we're just gonna set the pack ID on bit 0 over there. So then we do a D into 177774776, and this needs to be all ones. So we're gonna do a 1 and then 5 sevens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hit enter on that. This enables the extended command set. So next we do a D1777744 and we're gonna put in 2027. This is the format command for a RK07. So if we hit enter on this, it should start formatting that drive. Here goes nothing. Hit enter. It deposited. The SC12 light should be blinking, but it's not. That's not great. All right, this is pretty interesting, and I should have noticed this earlier, but we have a fault. We can see that the binary code is going to be 0100, and if we trace that out to here, 0100 is going to be control check 1, which indicates that a read-write command was issued during busy status. So I got to figure out how to clear that fault. And I don't know if the problem is the Emulex SC12 card or if the problem is the Fujitsu 2312. Always start with the simplest thing. Well, that and troubleshooting the physical drive and card terrifies me, so let's start with checking the cabling. And good Googa Mooga, how did I not see this before? One wire is clearly just flat broken, but looking closer, I think probably 3 or 4 are broken. I don't have any spare 60-pin ribbon cables, which means I gotta repair this one. I'll carefully pry off the back of the original connector, then I'll pull the cable off of the connector slowly, making sure not to pull out any of the pins in the process. After it was free, I just repositioned the connector about an inch further in on a clean part of the cable, slipped it in the vise, and crimped it down. Finally, a box cutter works great to slice off the excess cable. All right, I've got the drive spun up. I've got the PDP-11 on. So far, no error codes kicking out on the drive. That is excellent news. Maybe we really did just have a bad cable tripping us up here, but there's really only one way to find out, and that's to try and run the built-in format thing utility again. So I've got all of the values toggled in here except for the very last value. So we're gonna do a D1777744, and we're gonna deposit the value of 2027. This should start the format. I'll go ahead and hit enter. The yes, the light is flashing on the Emulex card, and the light has stopped flashing. So close. Oh man, it did seem like it was formatting, but now we have 2 new error codes kicked off on the drive. All right, it's been a couple of hours, and I think I've cracked it. Check this out. If I do an examine of 177774440, and I just hit a return on that, we get 000226 back. That is the correct code for a format complete of a simulated RK06. So I have successfully formatted part of that drive. I've actually successfully formatted 2 parts of that drive. So the final setting that we ended up with here was 10B hard sector as a 2311, so it's a 48 megabyte drive. And that's gonna be split up into 3 different RK06 drives. And I've just formatted 2 of those 3 RK06 drives. So I've just got the 3rd one left, and then this drive will be completely formatted. So let me just punch that in right quick, and we'll get that 3rd and final RK06 formatting here. So what was the big mistake that I made here? Because clearly this was a me problem and not a that problem. And it's such a dumb, simple thing. I forgot to tie a ground wire from the case of the Fujitsu to the case of the PDP-11, and that was giving me weird, spurious faults. So what that means is that I could probably go through, change all my settings, and reformat this with RK07s or whatnot, and it might even work as a 2312, but honestly, 48 megabytes is gonna be plenty. This seems to be working. I don't wanna mess with a good thing, so we're just gonna rock this because it seems to be working just fine. Which finally brings us to the question of how do we get RSX11 onto that hard drive? There are no TU58 RSX11M install tapes, so we have to come up with a different way to get the install onto that hard drive. And I asked this in the previous episode, and you guys had a ton of brilliant suggestions, and we're definitely going to explore those. But I think for today, like, man, I'm tired, boss. Let's just, for a moment, take the difficulty slider from hard mode down to easy mode. And we're gonna do that with this thing right here. This is Mark's personal Unibone that he lent me specifically for this project. At the heart of it is a BeagleBone FPGA that admittedly has more processing power than the entire Tower of Power here, but this thing can do some pretty trick stuff. Notably, it can emulate hard drives. So we can plug this into there and boot into an RSX11M install using the Unibone, then copy that RSX11M install from the Unibone down to the Fujitsu, pull this out, and boot into RSX11 off of the Fujitsu.
Champagne would fall from the heavens, doors would open, velvet robes would par.
And it'll be a glorious event, but I'm like, formatting the hard drive was supposed to take 10 minutes, and here I am 2 days later. So who knows how this is gonna go, but let's plug it in and get started. I'm actually gonna pull the Emulex card out and slot it into the backmost slot, and then I'm gonna put the Unibone in the slot that the Emulex card was in. And now that everything's plugged in and it's all spun up, we're in the Unibone prompt here. You can see that if I type ls, we get a directory listing of everything that's stored on the Unibone. I think we just want to run one of these RSX11M 4.8 files up here, /RSX11M 4.8 underscore du0_34.sh. I think that's the one that we want to give a shot. Let's just go ahead and return on that. And yeah, okay, it's doing something. The CPU reset, which means that the Unibone finally released the NPG grant stuff so that the CPU can now actually run. All right, so it says MSCP drives ready. Start 10,000 to boot from drive 0. So I think if I just do S10000 on here, it just gave me an error. I may have to call Mark and see if we can figure this out so I can get booted up in RSX11 off of the Unibone, because I don't know what I'm doing. I spent hours on the phone with Mark last night, and I think we've figured it out. Like, if this is easy mode, I am terrified of what hard mode would be. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna type ./RSXM70.sh. This is a script file that should then initialize the correct disk for the 1144 here. So if I go ahead and hit return on that, it's gonna It's very verbose, but when it gets to the end, we should see it say something about how the disk drives are ready. Yep, there we go. All right, MSCP drives ready. So if I come over here to the 1144 and I do E10123, this is going to examine 10,000, and we can see that the value of 12700 is in there, which is the correct value. So I should be able to do an S10123. So start 10,000 on the 1144 here. And yeah, there we go. Device DL00 not in configuration, 01, 02, 03 not in configuration. RSX11M version 4.8. I got to enter the date and time. There we go. Midnight, August 23rd, 1984 is our date. The column width is 80. There we go. We've booted into RSX11M off of the Unibone, which is fantastic, but now we have to figure out how to get it from the Unibone down to our physical hard drive. And this is where we run into a problem of hardware specifications. So we need to do something called a Sysgen. Yesterday I spent hours on the phone with Mark doing something called a prep gen. Not the actual Sysgen. We created a configuration file that tells Sysgen what our system is set up like, so Sysgen can then do the proper thing. So we need to jump into the correct user directory. So we're going to do a set/space UIC equals bracket 200 comma 200 close bracket set space /UIC equals bracket 200 comma 200 bracket enter. There we go. So now we just do an at Sysgen and there we go. System generation phase 1. Do you want to inhibit execution of MCR commands prep gen? No, we do not want to do a prep gen. Yesterday we did a Y on this. So we're going to hit no on that. Have you made a copy of the distribution kit? That's a new question. I'm just going to say yes. Sure, why not? Are you generating an unmapped system? I think we're no on this one. And use an input saved answer file. This is the ultimate question that we were looking for. Yes, we have an input saved answer file. It's going to use the one that we generated yesterday. The default is syssaved.cmd, so that's what we're going to use. I'm just going to hit return on that. And let's see here, name of output answer file. Again, I think I'm just going to use the default on that, so we're just going to hit return. Use saved host configuration. Sure, we're going to hit yes on that. Use saved peripheral configuration. Yes. Skip end of section breakpoints, yes. Skip end of execution breakpoints, yes. Clean up files from previous gens, sure. Chain to phase 2 after phase 1 completes, yes. And there we go. By the way, these 15 questions that it just asked, it skipped a few in the middle there, is the short version. So now we just gotta sit here and wait and let this run, and hopefully it all goes through smoothly. I have no idea what's going on. The Sysgen took a hair under an hour and a half, which meant I had a bit of time to kill, so I pulled out my little handheld emulation machine and fired up Chrono Trigger. I've been giving this a replay lately, and it truly is one of the greatest games of all time. Mercifully, the Sysgen finished without drama, or so it seemed. We started moving on with the next steps, and things went sideways fast. First, we wanted to boot the newly Sysgen file, but that just crashed out hard and halted the CPU. Turned out that the VMR step of the Sysgen actually failed. We tried running it again, and now we could see why it failed. Apparently, this Sysgen is having difficulty with the TU58 drivers and the data terminal drivers. It thinks they're occupying the same interrupt vectors for some reason. In the interest of just moving on, we fired up a line editor and modified the sysvmr file to prevent loading the TU58 drivers. We'll deal with those in the future. With the modified sysvmr saved, we ran VMR again, and this time it worked just fine. After it finished, we ran save/wb, which should save the boot block and make this version of Sysgen OS bootable. This of course failed. The whole system hung for 10 minutes, and this is something that should take seconds. We were getting mildly frustrated at this point. Once we booted back up, we tried it again, and this time it worked. We were then able to boot the new Sysgen copy of the OS. Finally, some progress. This copy has the drivers for the RK06 on it, so all we have to do now is mount those drives, initialize them, and start copying files over. I'll just type MOU DM0:/FOR to mount them as foreign uninitialized drives, and it didn't just crash, it hung the entire bus and halted the CPU. We booted back in and double checked all sorts of stuff about the VMR, but no matter what, every time we try to hit the drive, whether it be trying to mount it or trying to initialize it, it just crashes the CPU violently. This is frustrating, but also I'm 99% certain that it is not a hardware fault. I'm pretty sure everything is working at 100%. It's a fault of the user not understanding what's going on here and a lack of familiarity with the system. In PDP-11s, there's something called a grant.
Yes.
A line that daisy chains across all slots on the backplane. Now, if you have an empty slot, this grant line becomes broken, and the CPU sees that broken grant line and it freaks out. So if you have an empty slot, you take something like this and you put it in. This is a G7273, and it's an NPG and bus grant continuity card. And you can see there's a little jumper here that connects 2 pins and 4 more on the backside that connect more pins. And all this does is it ensures that if you have an empty slot, the grant continuity stuff is continuous all the way to the last slot where the terminator is. However, if you have a card that needs to take control of the bus on the occasion, like a disk controller card that needs to do DMA, you don't want this grant continuity to be permanently connected. You want the card that needs to do DMA to be able to control whether that grant is continuous all the way to the end. Whenever the CPU tells that disk drive to, hey, take control of the bus and start doing DMA or whatever, it needs to be able to break that grant continuity using all of the logic on board and then start doing whatever it needs to do on the bus. However, this backplane is wire wrapped, and one thing that often happens on these is that the grant continuity lines will be wire wrapped across a specific slot. So that way, if you plug something in there, it can never break the chain, and I'm pretty sure that's what's happening here. These are the 2 slots that we're using for the Unibone and the Emulex controller card. Now initially I had the Emulex card where the Unibone is located, but because the Unibone's a little fat, I moved the Emulex card back 1 slot and put the Unibone in there. But I want to check the quality of the backplane. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove both of these cards here, get them right out of the way, and then we're going to use this card right here to check whether that grant line is continuous or not. Now this is just a little voltmeter card that displays the voltages on the bus made by George Hope. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it's also an NPG and bus grant continuity. And the reason that we're going to use this to check the quality of the backplane is that the NPG grant line comes up to a little jumper here. So I can actually remove the jumper, which will break the grant continuity between that. And then I can attach a voltmeter across these 2 pins and check whether the backplane is hardwired to have NPG on or off. So I've got the voltmeter hooked up to those 2 pins now. Let's plug it into the slot where the Unibone was plugged into originally. And yeah, we can see that the NPG grant continuity pins are not connected on the backplane. But let's go back a slot to where the Emulex card was now plugged into. So if I plug it into there, look at that, 0.3 ohms. The NPG grant continuity is hardwired on the backplane for the last slot of this primary backplane. Everything was just because of 1 tiny little wire that was wire wrapping 2 pins. We're booted back up into the RSX11M install on the Unibone, and you can see that if I do a dev DM, it shows our 3 RK06s. So we're gonna do an ALL, that stands for allocate, DM0:. That worked before. The one that always crashed it was this one, MOU, which says to mount the drive. And then we're gonna do it on DM0:, and then we're gonna put a little qualifier on the end here that says /FOR. So it's a foreign drive because it hasn't been initialized to a PDP-11 file set. So if this works, that means that our grant continuity problem solved it. So let's go ahead and hit enter. That's the farthest we've ever gotten. First, we want to do a bad, so that way it knows where all the bad sectors are, if there even any are bad sectors or tracks. So we're going to do bad space DM0:/OVR/LI. We'll hit enter on that. That's probably going to take a while. Oh, it did find some bad blocks. found a couple of bad blocks. There's more bad blocks than I was expecting. So I'm glad we ran this. Wow, okay, it's still going. All right. We'll just let this finish. Okay, 27 bad blocks. Although that's 27 bad blocks out of like 27,000. So really, that's that's not that bad. I'll take that. All right, let's see if we can initialize the drive now. We'll do an ini space dm0 : and we want this to be called, I don't know, Usagi1. I don't know if the name can be that long, but we'll try to make it that long. And then we'll call it /vi to give us some information about this. And yeah, there we go. How cool is that? Label is Usagi1, and then we have a whole bunch of information about the disk. Okay, I was so excited to see it not violently crash the CPU that I didn't notice the real problem here. If you look closely on the screen, the initialization didn't actually succeed. It quit early with this error message right here. Disk is alignment cartridge. An alignment cartridge is a special pack that has a unique analog pattern on it, and it's used to align the heads of big drives like the Hawk, Phoenix, or RK06 and RK07 drives. But this is actually a Fujitsu 2312, and it's a sealed drive, which means the heads are aligned at the factory and never changed from there. There is no such thing as an alignment cartridge for a sealed drive like this. Just to make sure we weren't going insane, we actually initialized the disk as an RT11 disk from within RSX, and this seemed to work. However, when we try to initialize it as an RSX disk, we get the same error. Disk is an alignment cartridge. Next, we thought maybe we just need to format it using the RSX utility. So after building FMT from source, which was a wild new experience for me, by the way, we fired up FMT and it warned us that all the data would be erased. Then it aborted saying disk is an alignment cartridge. If ever there was a brick wall to run into, we just ran face first into it. No matter what we do, we cannot convince RSX that this Fujitsu drive is not an alignment disk. Like, what a weird problem to have. I tried switching it back over to soft sector. We tried reformatting it with the built-in Emulex formatting utility. Nothing. It's always the same behavior. Things are so close to working. We got it to first and goal, and we just couldn't get it into the end zone today. I would say that we're playing like the Cowboys out here, but the Cowboys actually beat the Chiefs yesterday, which is, it's like opposite day here in Texas. So if anybody has any ideas, hop in the comments and let me know, because Mark and I spent hours on it and we're coming up empty-handed. So, well, I got a lot of editing to do. I'm gonna head inside and get to work, but I wanna thank all of you so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope to see you in the next one.